Welcome, everybody. This is the Fans to Pros panel. All of the participants in this panel have had extensive experience as members of the Comic Book Club of Ithaca or as attendees at ITHACON in their formative years and have gone on to work as professionals in the field. And I'm going to actually let them introduce themselves and ask them to figure out among themselves who was first, what was the earliest ITHACON anybody attended, and work up from there. So whoever went to the earliest ITHACON goes first and proceed from that.
I went to one right before the hotel was used. Would that have been an early one?
It would have been early.
Like, yes.
But what year is the question?
I don't recall what year. Yeah, I just remember it was in the Women's Center.
I know
we were at GIAC first, and then we went to yes, and then we went to the Ramada Inn, which is now the Hotel Ithaca.
Yeah,
and then we went. Yes,
must have been GIAC then.
Yeah,
Mine would have been GIAC as well. I know that my first club meeting was in 1982, and Matt, you were already part of the club. You were helping Tim Gray at Comics for Collectors at the time, which is how you and I met in what, 1983?
Yeah, I was doing all those paintings in the hallway that aren't there anymore.
Well, because they're not there anymore.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I took a look, and I have slides of them all though. So,
so Tom, you and Ed must predate Matt and me by just a little bit.
Probably just. I think my first one might have been 82.
Yeah, mine would have been 83, but I first came to a meeting with Bruce Stewart in the fall of 1982.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, the first meeting at the Ramada, the first ITHACON at the Ramada Inn was 6 in 1983.
Okay,
there you go.
We all attended 82.
All right, I think that was my first one then.
Yeah.
I think that was my first one then, because I don't think I went to, I think the first one I went to was in the hotel.
Yeah. I think I might have won go to the earliest one. I went to ITHACON number 2.
Ooh, okay.
And
you win. You get to talk first.
I tell this story. I as a kid, there was a bulletin board in the drugstore. There was this chain called Phase Drugs.
Oh, I remember Phase.
Right?
And their logo now looks
board.
like Dollar General, the black and yellow.
Yeah. Exactly. And they had that flyer, and you could rip off a little reminder date. And looking back, there was no way to check, is this still going on? And Ithaca was far away from Auburn where I lived. And we went to that convention. I was getting solid into comics, and it blew my mind. That influenced so much of my life, that convention. I had so much fun. And, that was like a career defining or life defining moment for me.
Yeah.
So Mike and Mark, let's bring you into this before all the old farts take up all of the
oxygen.
God, so I remember GIAC, and I remember the Women's Center. I vaguely remember the hotel, but I don't know if it was ITHACON or if it was that record. They used to do that record show there.
Yes, there was also a record show.
Yeah, so I definitely remember the Women's Center. I remember going down there, and I think I would have gone to some of the other ones too, but I definitely remember the Women's Center.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first one I went to was probably 90, 91. I was 14, 15 years old, and I was getting into comics, and I was drawing all the time. And same thing. I went, and it was the first comic convention I ever went to. I'd never been to any other one, and it just blew my mind. And I remember, because I lived in Syracuse, and my parents brought me down there, and the whole drive back, I was looking through all the comics I bought, and I just had this fire in my belly, I need to do this, when I was, so it was just, it definitely changed my life and steered me towards becoming an artist.
And one of the great things about ITHACON and the Comic Book Club of Ithaca was what a welcoming community it was.
Oh, yeah.
In the days when there wasn't any internet for us to share our obsessions, this gave us a place to talk about our bizarre interests.
Yeah.
Yep, it sure did.
Yeah. And
The
I
one-
I was gonna say, like, Ithacon always seemed to have like a smaller gap between like the fans and the pros. So like as a little kid,
That's because we were fans and pros.
yeah. Well, I mean, like I was talking to Walt Simonson as a kid, right? And I knew he was, and
Would
he
you
was
go back
nice
in
to me.
time?
What's that?
Never mind. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, but I think like at other shows, like you just don't get that close, or either fandoms. Like I'll never have a beer with Mick Jagger, but I've had a drink with Neil Adams or whatever. I mean, like that's the amazing thing, and
That's
Ithacon
better.
makes it so much easier.
That's better, isn't it?
So
Yeah.
let's talk about the paths we took through the club to
Right.
working professionally. Now, Tom, I think you would have struck first as a pro. Do you want to start?
Well, yeah, it's pretty simple because I would, I ended up getting work from DC through Roger Stern, who I met at ITHACON. I became friends with at ITHACON, and he actually at first I was writing this comic strip in Syracuse that Joe Rezek was drawing, Captain Cuse. So it was kind of like a Sunday strip every week with a continued story with a superhero.
I grew up with that. I loved it.
Yeah, I
I'm
remember.
glad.
Yay!
I'm glad.
It was
when,
awesome.
When Roger got the Action Comics Weekly job, that's like a weekly Sunday strip of Superman, and he got like overcommitted, he brought me in to help him with that. And that led to more work with him, which I would have done anonymously for the rest of my life. I loved it. I just loved it.
I'm one of the legion of alternate Roger Sterns too.
Yeah. But he felt guilty about that. So he outed me to his editors, and that led to more work. And that led to me being hired as an editor at DC. And, but it all came from, if I'd never been to Ithacon, it never would have happened.
Yeah. I almost joined you at DC. They offered me the coloring editorship, and I didn't want to move. Yeah.
I don't remember that.
What year
Oh, it was just a very quick phone call.
Ah,
And it was like, hey, we're looking for a color editor. Are you interested? I said, would I have to move? And they said, yeah. And I said, no. Thank you very much. I do appreciate that. But we
You probably did the right thing, but when would that have been?
Oh, let me see. I'd say, I'm trying to remember the gentleman who called me. 80s.
Okay.
Around
I was gonna
88.
ask you that, yeah.
Yeah.
I got
Mark
there-
Chiarello took it.
Okay. I got there in
wow.
1990. I don't think we had a color editor in 1990 when I got
Yeah, I can't remember exactly when it was, to be
there.
honest.
Yeah.
and
So
I'm
Matt, what
sorry.
was your actual path to getting into the pro ranks?
Mine?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, Roger Stern had a lot to do with it, to be honest with you, man, and doing a lot of practice. But hooking up with the Comic Club of Ithaca and getting to meet professionals and show them my work, was great. And Roger always got these great copies, black and white copies of stories that he'd give me. So I think I colored every Avengers issue was it Avengers? Yeah, I colored a whole bunch of Thors and a whole bunch of Avengers. No one will ever see, but it was all in practice, So Roger had a lot to do with it. But the one person who I think really got me started, I met at ITHACON, and it was Jan Dursema.
Oh, yes.
And she looked at some drawings I had done and painted with watercolors, and she said, man, you should be a colorist. You got great color sense, or something along those lines. And I said, really, what does it pertain to, and how does it work? because I didn't have a clue, you know, I figured they just painted, you know, but no, she said, she sent me a big long letter explaining the color process with a chart.
And you should mention what that process is, because I don't think people realized how complicated your job was at that time.
Oh, back then, yes, we couldn't do it with computers because they hadn't been invented to do it with yet. They were starting to come in later on, but when I first started, we were doing it the old true, you know, tried and true method of hand separations and hand painting,
and you had to code everything, Y2B6, that sort of thing.
That sort of thing, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Which you should explain, because no one who's under the age of 600 is going to understand what I just said.
Well, everything that's printed is 4-color printing, okay? Unless you're doing lithography or something like that. But I mean, basic comic books, what they call 4-color process, means they lay it down in blue, yellow, red, and a K-tone.
CMYK, right.
CMYK. Well, you know, they might not know what CMYK is.
Cyan.
The K actually stands for black, but since he was already taken, you know, they had to call it K. And it's all different percentages, and I'd have to paint up the pages and write what percentages of color were in each figure, so that the separators could then figure out, okay, well, this has to go here, and this is, you know, what's going to make that color up out of the 3 different colors, and then hold it all together with the black line. So I hope that's not too complicated an explanation.
Superman's cape was YR, which was
YR, and his costume was B.
His costume was B, so it was just blue
with a little R2B added.
And YR is full red and full yellow, because the red they used is very kind of purple.
It's pink, yeah.
So Matt, when you were talking about the hand separation, the hand separation is actually cutting plastic.
That's right. Yes, they used to use a film that they would actually physically lay over the pages, the original art pages, large size pages, and cut the shapes out for the screens for the color to pass through and go onto the paper. And they had to make plates after that, which were fashioned from the screens, and it's a long.
that's why in old comics, if you have a magnifying glass, you see dots.
Yeah, dots, Ben-Day dots.
Yeah.
Although today's kids could understand that through inkjet printing at home.
It's very similar. Yeah,
it is very similar. That's a good point.
Yeah, but it's sort of like, I always thought of it like the final process is sort of akin to silk screening.
Yes.
You know, in layers, if you will, where they lay down the yellow first, and all the percentages of yellow go down, and then all the percentages of red go right on top of it. Then the blue goes on top of that to make your grays, your browns, all your tertiary colors, and then you hold it all together with the black line. And that's how to color a comic book page.
And the bane of the colorist's existence was the actual giant presses that they used to print them, which were 40, 50 years old at the time.
Yeah, especially at Charlton.
And I know I've talked to people saying that they adjusted the color in the printers by dumping buckets of ink into the hoppers.
That's right.
They'd be watching the pages roll out and say, yeah, red's getting a little faint. Dump another bucket of red in there.
Yeah.
So
you need another bucket of YR. You know?
Right. Yeah. So it was not exactly a conforming printing job to what you had designed.
You could always tell when you had gotten to the end of the print run.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. And bad separations were the bane of the colorist's existence, because sometimes they dropped screens, and it was just the production pace was so fast on these things that, you know, they often made mistakes and separations, especially when they started going to early computer stuff. Now, still making hand guides, but they were for computer separators. So they said, don't even bother coding it anymore. And so we did painting, and then they would interpret from that. And sometimes it was not good. No.
You know, we got started and I realized we haven't introduced ourselves to the people who are attending. Maybe we should say who we are and what we do at some point.
Sure. Well, I think they see your names in the Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they can Google who are these people and why are they talking to us?
But,
Okay. Well, it's your idea.
sure.
Okay. Joe Edkin, I worked as a writer for toy companies dealing with licensed properties like Superman and the X-Men, worked at Marvel, DC, and Archie on various projects, and came through the Comic Book Club of Ithaca. Next.
Anybody?
Who's next?
All right. I'll go next.
You go next.
Yeah, I been
Who
through
are
the
Matt Webb.
but through the Comic Book Club of Ithaca way back when. I got enough good information, did enough practicing, had enough support from the great people who were at the club and the shows and whatnot, and then eventually the pros started, like the editors and stuff started to take notice. And that's basically, one ITHACON. It was the one where Denny O'Neil and Mike Carlin, and I think it was the Superman ITHACON.
I think so.
Yeah. And Denny looked at some color samples I had, and he said, I see nothing wrong with these.
High
Send them
praise
in.
from Denny.
Yeah, he said, send them in. So I did. And I never heard anything, right? So Mike Carlin ended up taking my samples down to New York City and showing them to Bob Rzakis, who gave me a work. And my name is Matt Webb, by the way. That's basically what we started with, wasn't it? Yeah.
Oh, good. My name's Ed Catto, and I'm currently an instructor at Ithaca College. My path from ITHACON and the Comic Book Club of ITHACON took me a little more on the corporate side. So when I worked at places like Nabisco and Unilever, I always ended up doing projects with Marvel and Valiant and had so much fun. And that led me with my partner, Steve Rotterdam, to found a agency called Bonfire Agency. And we were a marketing firm really targeting the world of comics, helping companies connect with super passionate fans.
You wouldn't happen to have been involved in the Batman animated series Eskimo Pie card set that was on the back of the boxes, would you?
No, not. I was right around all that time though, Joe. Yep.
I asked because I wrote that.
Oh yeah, gee. We did an amazing thing with Marvel, and there came a point where they're like, "Oh, we're going to give you an artist," and I wanted to get a real artist, but also I needed someone who wasn't like drawing women too sexy or violent or anything. So we went through like my list, and we ended up with this beautiful artwork by Chris Sprouse that I just.
Oh yeah, Chris is top notch. I worked with Chris on several occasions. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So that was great, and from there, we run a licensing company with an old character from the 60s. Currently have a lot of fun doing writing for places like Back Issue Magazine. And I really enjoy stretching my artistic muscles doing illustrations for people like Ahoy Comics.
Have you met John Trumbull, who works with Tomorrows?
Yeah, I haven't met him in person, but John's great.
He was one of my students at the Kubert School.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah, that whole Tomorrow's gang is just so much fun. Everyone's got so much passion they bring to every project.
Oh, I see Mark has muted his microphone. It's his turn to talk.
Sorry, there's a 5-year-old in the distance that was getting a little loud, so I had to down a little bit. But yeah, I'm Mark Fenton. I grew up in Ithaca, went to ITHACON, went to Comics for Collectors when it was on the Commons, and I actually had to go up those stairs to get there.
Yeah.
Matt and I both worked there at different times up those stairs.
Wow.
So
Remember those wonderful paintings?
Yes. Yep. I remember those very well. I'm the guy that at ITHACON talked to Roger Stern, and he said, hey kid, just give up. You're not any good at this. I'm kidding. Like Roger Stern was really nice. And he was always good. He always listened, and I'd ask him all these questions about his stories, everything like that. But then I moved to New York City, and I worked for Estee Lauder Corporate, and met Jimmy Palmiotti there. And he was super nice dude. I met him at a convention, told him, I was interested in writing, had him, sent me some scripts, had me send him some of my scripts. But didn't really go into comics from there. I went more into like acting. I did some Spider-Man appearances for Marvel. And it was funny because they would send you this clip of what your answers had to be to people. So like when you're in the Spider-Man costume, if someone's like, hey, shoot a web, and you have to be like, I really would like to, but the manager yelled at me last time because they had to clean that webbing from the ceiling. So
but it dissolves in an hour.
It does.
So
they forgot that part.
And I went at that, and then I worked on Avengers, the first Avengers movie. They shot some of it here in Albuquerque, so I was one of the SHIELD agents in that.
Cool.
I was in Black Panther. I was in Infinity War. Working on Better Call Saul now.
Oh, cool.
And then just then I went to Full Sail as for writing, creative writing, and just wanted to get better. I worked on Planet Comics for Antarctic Press last year for the relaunch of that. We ran a couple successful Kickstarters. I've got a couple things coming out this year. Working with Phil Hester, which is huge for me.
Yeah, I know
great.
Phil.
Yeah,
He's great. He's funny too.
So yeah, and then you'll see a couple more Kickstarters from us this year, and 1 or 2 more published things from a mainstream publisher.
Nice.
So yeah, long path, but we're getting there.
Mike?
I'm Michael Borkowski. I'm a storyboard artist and illustrator. I've been doing storyboards for about a little over 20 years now. I've worked on all kinds of like comic book type things like X-Men and Avengers and the animated series and things like that. And also have done a lot of children's books that are based on Marvel characters and DC characters, and do a lot of sports art and things like that. And yeah, I grew up in Syracuse and went down to ITHACON. I was a big time getting into comics, and I found out there weren't a lot of like Syracuse conventions in like the early 90s. So I would look around, and I found out, oh, there's one in Ithaca. Hey, Mom and Dad, where's Ithaca? Go there. So they took me down, and like I said, it just blew me away. And I to see the artists there doing what I wanted to do, it was just like, wow, there's like real people that make these things, and maybe I could be one of them someday, And it was pretty awesome.
I was always jealous of the people who were on the other side of the table at conventions, because I wanted to be them.
Yeah,
I really wanted to work in comics.
It's
The
funny
main
because-
reason I like being on the other side of the table is that I'm not crushed in the crowd.
Yeah,
I like having a
that's
table
always a good
between
thing.
me and everyone else.
Yes.
So I guess I have a question actually for Bill, because I'm curious now, like back then I didn't realize like, the guests that you had at these shows. And now when I look back at those programs and stuff, and I'm like, for that size of a show, for you to get those people that you got, I mean, that was amazing. Like, how did you swing that?
Well, I think somebody has mentioned it along the way here, is that the wonderful thing is that most of the guests we had, which included a lot of really big name guests, Joe Simon was here, Murphy Anderson was here multiple times, a lot of people continue to be fans themselves.
Mm-hmm.
continue. And since it was a fan convention, they really supported us in ways that they would not support a commercial convention. And by a fan convention, nobody has ever been compensated for their work at ITHACON.
No, and we're not
ITHACON, I'm sorry?
We're not that far away from New York City either. So
Right.
It was a good day trip, get out of the city,
Yes.
nice, quiet, and be adored by lots of people and get fed well.
Right. But I think ITHACON was popular with people. Number one, we treated all of our guests like guests. And number two, they could interact with people like you guys when you were, just starting out or just hoping to start out as peers. And I think they genuinely enjoyed that kind of, back and forth. I mentioned several times that at big conventions, if you go to talk to the guests, usually you wait in a long line. And when you finally get to the front of the line, you have 30 seconds.
Mhm.
And, at ITHACON, even a couple of years ago, Jim Shooter was here and he brought, Jim Shooter is making his living going to big international conventions. And, all of that involves with how much they have to charge to get in because of how much they are paying him. Of course, they have to fly in there and all of that. But at Ithaca, Jim just brought his portfolio of all old stuff that he had worked in, was perfectly happy to sit and chat. And, you could walk up to him. There would be 2 or 3 people in front of the table. You could hang around for 20 minutes or half an hour, engage him one-on-one. He would show you stuff that he had done. But that was a fairly typical experience.
And one of the things about ITHACON is that the guests were that generous with their time. And that's something I tried to carry over. One of the people who couldn't be here today because he's super busy is Aaron Cooter.
Right.
And I was up here during my days teaching at the Kubert School, and I spent a lot of time looking at his portfolio. I couldn't give him any work, but I told him a lot of what I was teaching at the time, and I'm delighted to see how much work he's getting now.
Yeah, somebody who says I have too much work backlog to be interviewed for a convention is that's good. That's success.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing is that since we started when we did, the first few ITHACONs, when we got publicity, it was all of the nature. There are a lot of stupid newspaper pictures of me personally, and of Tim and of Aaron Pitchell, who was also involved in those days, in odd poses. And the theme was, well, can you believe that grown men still read comic books? Yeah.
And there had to be a bam or a pow.
Right, exactly. Yes, absolutely.
Biff. Had to be a biff.
Yeah. But within the club and within the convention, it really did act as a safe space for people who, would come in and say, well, if outside of here, I am mocked for what I like to do. If I tell my parents what I would really like to do with my life is draw comic books, my parents would say, oh my, where have we gone wrong? And, but we didn't say that.
Not with that. My family is a whole bunch of artists. My grandfather was a jazz musician in gin joints during Prohibition. My going into any sort of art was never a threat to anyone in my family, thank goodness.
Right.
Yeah, I think, growing up, I was always drawing and coloring and penciling and just, for fun. But when I got serious, I think my parents were like, not really sure.
Right.
I'm like, well, if he wants to try, but, the rest is history.
So I was going to tell a funny story about how I got my first professional.
Well, hang on just a second, Joe. Tom hasn't introduced himself yet.
No, right. That's right. And the story involves Tom. So
so
I thought I was going to get away with
remember
it. I'm Tom Peyer, and I'm a comic book writer and editor, and I was one of the original editors at DC's imprint Vertigo, and where I worked on things like Sandman and Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol, Peter Milligan's Shade, Hellblazer, other good stuff. And then I went freelance and started writing a bunch of comics myself. And I wrote Legion of Superheroes for something like 5 years, which was a very long time to the readers of that book.
I have to say, it was one of my favorite eras of Legion. You and Roger were telling great stories.
Thank you. I was fishing for that. And then Our Man I did at DC. That was something people remember. And that after that, I bounced around. I did some Bart Simpson comics, Batman '66, and now I'm the editor-in-chief of Ahoy Comics, which is based in Syracuse. And we've got we're starting to get some fairly well-known comics now. We do Second Coming by Mark Russell and Richard Pace, Leonard Kirk, which is about it's sort of like an odd couple comedy about a superhero and Jesus Christ living together. And it's a really good book. It's a really thoughtful book. Everybody thought it was going to be sacrilegious and there were petitions against it. And it's not that at all. It is a very friendly book to the idea of Christ. And my own book, The Wrong Earth, that I do with Jamal Igle, who always comes to ITHACON and couldn't be here today. But, and that's about a campy 60s mass crime fighter and his late 80s gritty, ultra-violent version getting trapped on each other's parallel Earths. And that's running currently. So that's that.
Very good.
Thanks.
Okay, Joe, you ready with your story?
You have a story about us?
I've always got stories. I'm a writer. I'm full of words. One of the things that I find funny about my pathway in, now I consider myself one of the world's worst freelancers. And the reason for that is I hate the networking end of things. I'm just not good with that. If I don't know an editor, I don't want to talk to them. If I become friendly with an editor, I don't want to trade on the friendliness. So I just had a terrible career because of that. I just hated going out and selling myself. When I got my first job on a DC project, I did everything you possibly could wrong and got the job. As a writer trying to break into the industry, it's hard to get your work noticed unless you're published somewhere else, because what editor has time to read proposals? With art, you can flip through the pages and get a sense, but you really have to work to read proposals. When Matt and I were first breaking in, DC had their new talent showcase projects, the bonus books of 16 pages in the middle of a comic. Every month comic, a different title. And at that point in time, I was managing the comic book store in Ithaca, had made friends with another writer by the name of Jeff Hetzel, and he and I would get together every Sunday and come up with proposals and send them out to be rejected, and realized part of the problem was no one had time to read things. So we made the mistake of, well, why don't we find ourselves an artist to draw our proposals? And another customer at the store, Mac Myers, teamed up with us and started drawing our stories so we could submit packages to be rejected. Ultimately, Matt was working with an editor at DC by the name of Kim Yale, and he connected me to Kim. Mac and I decided, okay, we're not making any progress doing this through the mail. We're going to go to New York City and go to the DC offices and actually try to meet people face to face to sell our work. So he got us in through Kim Yale, and I traded upon knowing Tom Peyer, who was editing at Vertigo at the time. DC had launched Green Lantern Corps Quarterly. Roger was working on it. Tom was working in the office, Roger Stern, that is. Again, I'm one of the Legion of Alternate Roger Sterns. So Tom set up an appointment with Kevin Dooley, the editor of Green Lantern Corps Quarterly, so that Mac and I could pitch him personally. We got into New York City to get the message that the appointment had been an hour ago. We missed the appointment. So we called in a panic, and Kevin was incredibly gracious, set up a time for us to come in the next day. So we went in on time. We actually got there early now that we knew we had an appointment. Sat there, and for 45 minutes, he told us every single thing we had done wrong with our 10-page story. He excoriated it. From, why is this page here? You don't need this page. Well, it was to develop. You don't need this page. What's the most important part of your story on this page? Well, then why is it in this teeny tiny little panel? It should be the biggest. Everything that we did wrong in excruciating detail. And after 45 minutes of being told everything we had done wrong and absorbing that information, we learned more in those 45 minutes than you could have in maybe 3 years at the Kubert School. It was just this compressed.
Well,
Kevin had this bizarre look on his face as he was going to shove us out the door and said, you know, I really think I'd like to use this story. And so that is how we wound up getting our first story published.
I'm in that issue.
Great. Yeah.
After that, my pathway was actually through licensed properties. Another bizarre link of stories. Jim Shooter was approached to write an interactive audio cassette for the 2XL toy. Jim Shooter can barely operate a coffee maker. Doing something as complicated as a 4-track audio cassette was beyond him. So he asked if Roger Stern would be interested in doing it. Roger had just finished the Death and Life of Superman and wasn't really in the mood for a new complicated project. And his reaction was, well, who do I know that's stupid enough to take this on? And hooked me up with a toy company. The DC editors at the time, Greg, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but they were dubious about a toy company bringing in their own freelancer. Mm-hmm. And Mike Kerlin, because it was a Superman project, was so astonished that the freelancer the toy company brought in didn't suck. I became a pre-approved writer for stories featuring the DC characters outside of comic books. Never could break the comic book end of things, but I got plenty of work for several years. Who else has strange stories of breaking in? Oh, yeah, I brought that conversation.
Not really.
I told my story. I wish it were stranger.
I just remember it was incredibly, you touched on a few points, Joe. It was incredibly stressful and strenuous to send samples off when you think you're getting better and better and better. And you send off something and I had a stack of rejection letters about this high from Marvel.
You got letters.
Yeah. DC never sent me a letter. Never. I never heard from DC until I started telling the editors that at ITHACON, oh, they have sent stuff in. They never. So that's when Mike Collins said, I'll take these down for you and show them the editorial. But yeah, it's just.
I have another footnote to the story Mac and I took to New York. We also got to meet with Tom Peyer in Tom's office.
Oh, did
And
he reject?
Oh, well, he rejects me. If he sees me on the street, he goes the other way.
Oh,
But he looked through Mac's samples, and the thing he said to Mac was, I'd be really impressed if you drew the underside of a car. That'll show me how much talent you have. And
Yeah.
so when Mac got back to Ithaca, he hand drew a thank you card with the underside of a car.
Was that a standard test you used?
Yeah, I got that from Carlin. Underside of a car, because nobody really is prepared to draw the underside of a car.
That's really good. Yeah.
And it's not, it's a little complicated, and it's to throw you a curve and see if you can adapt to demands, because you never know what a script is going to demand.
That's it. You have to have good knowledge of how to do everything. I mean, it sounds strange.
And use reference.
And
Using
use reference.
is a
Yes.
good thing.
And use reference, but like,
yeah. Tom just
You
had
know,
me draw two guys peeing in a men's room in McDonald's.
oh my goodness.
Right? That's not a joke.
True. It's true.
Yeah.
We paid you money for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was great.
Yeah. It was an illustration for a story. It wasn't really like, for my personal use or anything.
Oh,
It's
good.
funny the strange things that can lead to work. In the days that I was doing the licensed properties, like the Eskimo cards that I asked Ed about, and the children's books, I wrote some of the golden children's books. I was apparently the first writer who ever gave a plot to a look and find book when I did Batman and Superman look and find books. The things you had to find actually propelled the story forward. They were clues. So I would be hanging around in the office and haunting, trying to get work on the comic book side of things. And finally, Dana Curtin, who was editing the kids line with Animaniacs and Looney Tunes and the like, was sick of seeing me in the offices and wanted to get rid of me and offered me work under the theory, you look like you have a life outside of comic books. I want to tap into that. And I would bring all sorts of outside of comics references to the work that I did for her. I did a Scooby-Doo story that was a sequel to Arsenic and Old Lace that was about a haunted window seat in a house in Brooklyn.
Wow.
Yeah.
I want to hunt that one down. That sounds great.
I had the most fun writing Scooby-Doo because it was all about the gimmick. At first, as I'm sure Mark and all the writers on the panel would say, the point of story is conflict. Without conflict, you have no story, and you have the first season of Star Trek: The Next Generation. People standing around all going, oh, and I like you too. No conflict, no conflict. And that was one of the rules with Scooby-Doo. There could be no conflict amongst the characters, and you could not introduce new family members. Where do you come up with stories if there's no conflict? And ultimately, I realized it was about the gimmick. Apparently, again, I don't realize when I'm breaking ground, I was the first writer who had a female villain in a Scooby-Doo story. How would I know? It was based on Sally Lunn's tea shop in Bath, England. And I actually got to write my trip to England off on my taxes because I took photo reference in Bath and the artist used it. Got to write off my trip.
I've been there.
But it was all about the gimmick, whether it was a ghost. It was really a disguised lawnmower run by remote control, whatever the gimmick was. Mugwumps, last of the mugwumps. And I got to explain politically what a mugwump was. And that's how the gang knew that it wasn't a real monster. And my favorite story was Last of the Mugwumps, where the gang couldn't figure out who the villain was because the mystery machine broke down at a hotel with a convention of land developers. They were all land developers. Which one
That's
was
funny.
the villain?
That's very funny.
So we have about 15 minutes left, and I'd like to know what advice each of you would give for people who were in the position you used to be in.
You mean running a comic book store?
No. As a fan, coming to a convention and saying, gee, I wish I could get a job doing that.
I can just talk because I do a fair amount of shows, but I would say, and I get this asked a lot, is, a lot of people get discouraged because they are like myself. I was trying to get in the first place, and you get the rejection letters back and you think, wow, I've just turned in some really good stuff. This is it. It's the perseverance, man, and learn your material. If you're an artist and everything, learn how to draw, and simple,
learn
straightforward.
Learn how to
and
draw
how to storytell
things other than comic books.
Yeah.
There's a world outside of comic books to draw from.
Well, that's what you
Well,
should
like,
do,
learn
is
not to
draw
try to
everything
draw a
else
lot of
but
books
comic
are.
books first.
That's one thing I wish I did when I was younger. Like when I was learning to draw, Jim Lee was huge on X-Men, and I would try to ape Jim Lee, and I would try to draw like Jim Lee, and I would try to draw like Eric Larson and guys like that. And I wish I just learned more from life and just tried to draw like me, So yeah, that's that. I really wish. I look back at that stuff and I'm like, man, I wish I just learned how to draw from life instead of my favorite artists. Which it's good to learn.
But even your favorite artists started out imitating their favorite artists.
Oh, sure.
That's true.
Oh yeah, it's a place to start, but you want to expand beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, take life drawing classes, go out and sketch stuff, bring a sketchbook and sit on the commons someday.
Yeah, early on, it's more important for you to know how to do what you're doing than it is for you to get published. And
yeah.
You don't want to get published too early either because it's embarrassing.
Oh yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that, Tom? That someone else said something along those lines recently. I think it's a fascinating idea.
Oh, it's human nature. You look at a comic book and you want to be in a comic book, so you just send your stuff to a comic book before you've really learned how to do it. One of the things about writing is everyone thinks they can do it, and I'm here to tell you they cannot. And especially writing comic books, there are things about writing comic books that don't apply to other kinds of writing, and you have to learn them. A lot of it is space is just so much your enemy. You've got to write to the very, very limited space, and and when you start to do that, you'll be angry that you have to do it, and you won't want to do it, but you've got to do it. And
that's one of the pieces of advice I would give at conventions. No one is going to be able to give you an extra page or two because you need them to finish your story. You have to be succinct.
Space is absolutely your enemy. And there's never enough pages. There's never enough panels on the page. There's never enough. I mean, I always have to point out to people that you can't have two panels on the same page that show the entire Super Bowl. You need if you make them draw the Super Bowl and you have to have another panel, which you shouldn't, make it like a nice close-up so that the person doesn't die of exhaustion who's drawing
the Super Bowl. Yeah.
And So there's that. And there's little things too that you pick up. Like the last panel on a page is not, it's not like any other panel. It's got to have some little element of suspense or resolution or something to get you to turn the page, no matter how faint or no matter how subtle it is. It's got to be there.
That's one of the lessons Kevin Dooley gave Mac and me. Give the audience a reason to turn the page.
Turn the page. That's right. That's right. The last panel on the page is really special. And if, you know, when you have your Scooby-Doo land developer take off his ghost mask, and I know you do this, Joe, have it on the first panel of an even numbered page, because you want them to turn the page to see it. You don't want them seeing it like 10 panels before they get to it.
Mm.
So there's just a lot of stuff like that you learn over the years, and you learn from reading people, you learn from just chatting people up if you can at a convention. And I think too, it's really important these days to have something out there that people can read and digest easily. If you can get like a web comic going, even if you're a writer, you get somebody who draws pretty well, and get it up there and get it up there for free, and send links to people. Just if what you're doing is worth doing and you want people to see it, get people to see it. And it's so easy these days to just slap something up. You don't have to pay a printer bill.
And if you're going to conventions, listen. Nobody knows everything. You can learn from everybody. None of us here in these little boxes know everything. We're still learning.
I do.
You just want to keep growing.
And you want them to remember you. You want them to remember you in a good way. It's very easy, especially if you're the kind of person like us who spent like your entire childhood drawing pictures and writing stories instead of developing social skills. It's very easy to like go to a convention, meet your favorite editor, and say something so stupid and insulting that they never forget you. And that's not how you want to be remembered.
I was talking to some friends at high school reunion a couple of years ago, and they're always saying, I don't know how you ever graduated, Matt. You were always drawing and coloring and whatnot. You never paid attention in class. They were right.
Well, you can pay attention when you draw.
Yeah. I absorbed enough to get through, and yeah.
I will chime in here because I've seen this happen many times, and I'm sure any of you who have been to conventions have experienced this, is that assuming that the people you're talking to don't know everything is not the same as assuming that they're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So there's many times that people come in and I would observe somebody come in with a portfolio, show it to a professional editor, and the editor would explain like what was wrong with this work or what had to be changed about this work. And the person would basically say, well, who are you to say something like that about my work?
Yeah.
Well, he's the one who might buy it if it was the way he liked it, you know.
Which gets back to what I was saying about listening.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
We love it when people come up to us and say, your comics are terrible and I can do better.
That's a great way to get work.
Well, you go right ahead.
And I think, like, on going off Tom's point, like the other thing, and it costs money, but if you want to go the Kickstarter route to learn to everything that you have to do to do a book, I mean, for me that was crucial because I thought, I'm just going to write this guy's going to draw it, we're going to be done. To do all those other aspects of the promotion piece of it, the deadlines, like we set deadlines of when we wanted this book to go live. I really think like that really helps you. Mm-hmm. Especially in today's world where, a lot of publishers are more, TV, movie driven, where it's like, we want something that we can sell that could eventually be a TV show, that type of thing. Like I've submitted and, gotten rejections and, well, this isn't really what we're looking for. And stupid me, after about 5 of those, I was like, well, what is it that you're looking for? They're like, well, we're not really sure, but this isn't it.
Oh man.
Yeah, well, I was all set to do a Captain Scarlet book, And my buddy and Joe's ex-student Lawson was all set to draw it. He gave several samples to the publisher, and the guy couldn't pin down the look. He said, "No, I want it." So Lawson did several different, and the guy just basically said, "I don't know what I want," and it never got published. It never did. It would have been a good book too. I also did a UFO #1 with the same company, and it never saw print, but it's fully colored and ready to go.
Oh, that's from that UFO 70s show, man?
Yeah.
Wow.
He posted some of the pages on his Facebook feed. They're beautiful.
Yeah, I've been sending out, I published the whole thing on my Facebook feed, Joe. I said, well, if no one else is going to see this work, I'm going to put it up on, it's my work.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
So
if
I
you
put
can
the whole
get those
book up.
girls with the purple hair.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, Ed, I'll email you a copy.
Oh, I'd
I'll
love
send you all of it.
I just wrote a column about that show. I think it's a fascinating show, and I'm sure your artwork was phenomenal on it.
Oh, I thought it looked good. Joe Rubenstein inked it, and I'm drawing a blank on the pencil art, but it was good. Yeah, it looked good.
Yeah. I saw there was like a British publisher who did stuff way back when, but that's so cool.
TV Action used to do Jerry Anderson strips.
Gotcha.
Yeah, back in England. Yeah.
Okay, we have just a few minutes left. We're almost out of time. Anybody have something you've been saying, well, I might say this and not quite said it yet?
I love you guys.
Please watch Invincible on Amazon Prime Video. I worked on that show, and we're hoping for a second season. So,
I want to watch
Fantastic.
that. I want to watch that. Yeah.
I did storyboards on it, and there's 7 episodes that have aired or that have been released, I guess. The 8th episode and final episode of the season comes out next Friday.
Has it been renewed or?
Not yet.
Not yet. Well, good luck, man. It looks great.
It's just as crazy and violent as the Invincible comic book. So
wow.
Cool.
I will check that out.
Yeah. Well, it'd be nice if that creator could get a little success on TV.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'd like to thank you all very much for this. I'm truly hoping that next year we can do this in person and be face to face again.
That'd be great.
This has been great fun hanging out with you guys in these little boxes.
Yeah. At least we're all, vaccinated, right? So
yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah. Well, we have to have this has to finish enough so that Ithaca College will allow non-students and faculty onto the campus again. So
okay.
Mm-hmm. So that was our hitch this year. So.
Good.
Well, Mark and Mike, it was nice to meet you, even if I had met you before, 20 years ago when you were
probably
customers at Comics for Collectors, but nice to meet you guys.
Yeah, totally, man. It's good to see all of you.
Good to see you guys.
Yeah, that was fun.
Okay, thank you all.
Okay, guys.
Thank you.
Good night, gentlemen.
Take care.
Good night.